So the contest begins.
Yeah!
Continuing our ranking of 2024 death metal albums with Wormed with Omegon. It's been 8 years since this tech death group out of Spain dropped the brain-melting Krypticy, and 6 since the unfortunate passing of incredibly talented drummer G. Calero. The sci-fi concept continues, but the music has really stepped up the variety. V. Kazar steps in on the kit here, bringing just as much fury to the blast beats, now alongside some pretty surprising pace changes that make this album stand out from the last few, namely some grooves that wouldn't be out of place for Meshuggah. This one is going to... fantastic. Then we have Illdisposed within Chambers of Sonic Disgust. Call me a plebe, but I had no idea just how many albums this Denmark band had under their belt, with this now their 15th full-length since 1993. They've definitely trended in a more groove metal direction overall, but the vocals are still pure death metal, and songs like The Illdisposed take me to Morbid Angel's Where the Slime Lives, while others like Start Living Again have some Amon Amarth energy. It's on the slower side, emphasizing dark atmosphere and even incorporating some synth elements, all of which is captured perfectly by some excellent production. This one landed at good. Next up is Replacire with The Center That Cannot Hold. This Boston tech death band blew my brains out with their sophomore 2017 album Do Not Deviate, only to disappear for the next 7 years, so you'd better believe this was near the top of my anticipated albums when I saw it come up. Highly impressive performances, and all held together by some very dynamic and engaging songwriting, great sparing use of clean vocals too, and then the nearly 7-minute closer Uncontrolled and Unfulfilled throws in some excellent jazz elements as icing on the cake. This one landed at amazing. Next up is 200 Stab Wounds with Manual Manic Procedures. The second full-length album from this Cleveland old-school death metal band that even Papa Meat seems to love to rep in his videos. Personally, though, this is another of many bands in this sort of new wave of OSDM that I'm just sort of lukewarm on, like Sanguisugabog and Gate Creeper. They do a fine job of capturing that old spirit, but they rarely bring anything new or exciting to the table. It's a tight 30 minutes, but frequently I just find myself wishing I was listening to the classics instead. So this one also went to good tier. Next we have Summoning the Lich with Under the Reviled Throne. With a very similar approach to melodic death metal as the Black Dahlia murder, from riffs to vocals, I was very excited to see their albums go head-to-head in some friendly competition. This one is packed with hooks and fantasy imagery, and yet another list topper for me in a year overflowing with great death metal releases. United in Chaos was already an impressive debut, but this sophomore effort showed signs of the band still just getting started, and it went all the way to perfection. Then we have Krypticy with The Non-Return. Getting elements of Vader, Deicide, Autopsy, and Morbid Angel. Lots of fun shifting rhythms. The drums really cook on this thing. Tons of great tracks here like Hypatia's Heresy, The Void, and the very appropriately titled Ugh. And that incredible bass on The Water Street Butcher is excellent. Just delightfully vile death metal that loves to spit right in your big, stupid face, and it landed at amazing. Then we have Fulci with Duckface Killings. The Italian giallo horror-obsessed death metalers are back, this time paying homage to Lucio's batshit insane film The New York Ripper. More just classic 90s old-school flavor in the vein of other gore-soaked bands like Mortician, but I also appreciate the occasional added flair of tracks like A Blade in the Dark, which is a very accurate portrayal of the music used in the films of this era. The one thing I don't really like is the sort of hip-hop infused left turn of Knife, which is just kind of out of place on this record, but still a fun album for horror fans especially. It is going to great tier. Next up is Abramelin with Sins of the Father. This Australian death metal band formed all the way back in 1988, yet this is only their 4th album, coming in the wake of 2020's Never Enough Snuff. And with help from Matt Wilcock of Werewolves and Ackercock and David Haley of Psychroptic, there's plenty for a classic death metal fan to enjoy here. All the same, I wasn't really wowed by this either. Enjoyable, but kind of forgettable. Deceased Estate is pretty good. This one ended up landing at okay. Then we have Ripped to Shreds with Sanshi. Now, this San Jose band is another one of the few OSDM bands from the modern era I would truly say is worth investing your time in, given their masterful ability to truly capture that 90s sound while also putting their own signature twist on it. Here they continue to pull on Chinese folklore and more melodic elements of the previous album, while also doubling down on sheer speed and ferocity, not so unlike the likes of Dismember and Early Death. The result is tracks that are as infectious as they are heavy, with Force-Fed and Vision of Sin, Mirror of Darkness being especially potent in this regard. It went to fantastic, but you could potentially make a case for perfection. Then we have Monument of Misanthropy with Vile Postmortem Irrumatio. More horror-themed death metal, but this time dealing with the real-life horrors of serial killer Ed Kemper. Conceptually, not unlike Macabre's Dahmer, this record deals with the twisted man's life, but here with an extra fast and heavy approach more akin to the likes of Aborted, Benighted, and Cattle Decapitation. It landed at amazing. Then we have Ingurgitating Oblivion with Ontology of Nought. I basically describe this band as Tech Death's answer to Imperial Triumphant, although these guys have actually been around much longer. It's sort of gore guts meets jazz and a bad acid trip. Just pure madness, from the harrowing chaos of the death metal elements to the truly unsettling nature of whatever Last I Should Perish is. It's definitely not an album for everyone, but those who do make it through deserve some sort of medal. I am putting it at great tier. Next up is God Dethroned with the Judas Paradox. I really can't call this a death metal album because it is just so far removed from their earlier roots, and at this point just feels like a very mopey, generic black metal record with zero personality. I was so bored listening to this thing, which was all the more unfortunate since I was actually looking forward to it, and I enjoy their early material. So yeah, sadly, this one went to meh, which you can only see if I pull the board forward at this point. But moving on, we have Fleshgod Apocalypse with Opera. Another grand entry from my favorite Italian symphonic death metalers. More bangers here in Morphine Waltz, Per Aspera ad Astra, and Pendulum. Ultimately, I think this takes all the great lessons learned from the incredible Veleno and translates that into yet another great new chapter for their sound with some of the vocal changes here. A very strong listen for symphonic fans, and be sure to check out my tier list of all of their albums. I put this one at amazing. Then we have Gigan with Anomalous, Abstractigate, Infinitessimus. I'm a huge fan of this Chicago band, previously named in my most underrated metal band series. This is their 5th album, and I could scarcely believe it's been 7 years since the last one, and while it takes a bit to get started, the opening track almost seems like it's a test designed to weed out the normies before we get to the real ragers. Their sound is one I would describe to newcomers as psychedelic technical death metal, or better yet, gore guts on acid again, I guess. So I'm putting this one at fantastic. Then we have Thorium with Bastard. The 6th album from this Danish band formed in 1997, and it is a goddamn ripper. Take peak era At the Gates and Dismember, add a little bit more grit and grime, and you've got yourself some new HM2 goodness for the ages. It landed at good tier. Then we have Mercyless with Those Who Reign Below. One of France's premier old-school death metal bands, returning with their 8th album since hitting the ground running in the 90s. This album actually gives me a lot of similar vibes to mid-career behemoth albums like Zoskia Cultus and Demigod, with its blackened edges and bludgeoning approach to vocals and guitar riffs. Everything just feels caked in filth and maintains the raw, rebellious hallmarks of the classics, and plenty of wicked soloing, too. This one went to great tier. Then we have Nile with The Underworld Awaits Us All. Another banger of a release from the Kings of Egyptian-themed death metal, and another perfect balance between insane technicality and infectious, ancient-sounding melodies. Love that we can get both epic longer tracks and some under 2 minutes that go just as hard with To Strike with Secret Fang. As always, it's just insanely technical, but also insanely atmospheric. So many great songs for a record I would put in the upper tiers of their discography, which is another one I ranked this year and you can check out. This one on this chart is going to amazing. Then we have Night Rage with Remains of a Dead World. This is the melodic death metal band's 10th album, having formed in Greece 23 years ago and now based out of Sweden. They very much follow the tenets of that old Gothenburg sound. Fantastic riffing that takes me back to listening to In Flames for the first time in the early 2000s, and a strong vocal performance make this a must-listen for fans of the genre. I put it at fantastic. Then we have Corpse Fucking Art with Tomatized. Album 6 from this Italian band, and it's another pretty generic, brutal death metal album if you ask me. Cookie cutter riffs, one-note gurgles, and very little of substance, even for a band that leans into the sense of humor. Nothing here I've not heard before a million times, and frankly I found it to be a bit of a chore to listen to, even if it has its moments and is far from the worst thing I've ever heard, so it is going to okay. And we have Dark Tranquility with End Time Signals. One of my favorite bands of all time, so I'm pretty biased when it comes to anything they put out. I'll admit that this is far from one of my favorite of their albums. You can check out this tier list as well. But with bangers like The Last Imagination, Enforced Perspective, and Unforgivable, there's plenty to enjoy here. Solid melodic death metal for 2024, even if it's not one of my ultimate top picks. But it did earn a spot on amazing. Just for space here, gonna scooch this over a little bit more. Then we have Destructor with Indomitable. This Australian band's third album since forming in 1997, and it's a strong dose of more blackened death metal, right down to the upside-down crosses in their logo. Fuming death metal vocals and spotlight-stealing drumming are offset by jangly black metal tremolos and general blasphemous atmosphere. A very focused and consistently enjoyable listen, but I doubt I'll be thinking about it much a few weeks from now, so it got a spot on great tier. We also have Peeling Flesh with the G Code. Now, I saw a lot of people requesting this in the comments when I left it off that week's release list, but I have to say that for me, this is mostly just yet another example of why I don't care much for slam. I like some bands, but it's just a very paint-by-numbers approach to songwriting that by design kind of mostly bores me. And while the occasional fusions of kind of body count-esque hip-hop elements are kind of interesting, it's not executed in an effective enough way to save it from those aforementioned more generic elements, in my opinion. I'm intrigued, but just not quite sold, so this landed at okay. Then we have The Crown with Crown of Thorns. I've always been a little on the fence with this Swedish band, as should be apparent from their 90s death metal album appearances in those rankings, and I feel like that continues with this 12th album. Strong start with the thrashy I Hunt the Devil and Church Burner, followed by the more mellow-deathy Martyrian. After that, it's a little bit more hit and miss, but consistently enjoyable. Plenty to appreciate, but I just don't find myself overly gripped by it either. So I'm gonna put this one at great tier. Then we have the Black Dahlia Murder with Servitude. Continuing this band after the loss of Trevor seemed like an impossible task, and while it doesn't quite live up to his 10 years stronger moments, I think that the lineup here is very strong, with Brian stepping in on vocals, with Ryan and Brandon side by side on guitars, and Max and Alan on bass and drums. Very tight 33 minutes of non-stop melodeath riffing with that trademark Graveyard Camp and some standouts in the likes of Aftermath, Evening Ephemeral, and Transcosmic Blueprint. A little more experimentation would be nice from here on, but it's a strong comeback. I'm gonna put it at amazing. And then we have Undeath with More Insane. Despite seemingly being the only person on the planet who didn't much care for It's Time to Rise from the Grave, the new follow-up from this New York OSDM band absolutely knocked my socks off with its sheer speed and very tight, to the point, and frankly enthralling songwriting. Not to mention the riffs are a perfect combination of Cannibal Corpse intensity with the melodic hooks of At the Gates and Dismember. From highly infectious growl-along vocal moments to some pretty epic harmonized riffing and soloing, this album's brisk 34-minute runtime is packed to the gills with only the best, and that is why it is going to perfection. And here is the full chart. Thus far, you can't even fit it on one page anymore. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings. I will also link the previous parts. This is part 3 down in the comments. Let me know your rankings and like the video if you enjoyed it, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.